What would you say if you discovered that one suburban family had never been neighbors at all, but government test subjects for decades? What if FBI files revealed that every child was born not with a random anomaly, but with a planned defect? And how would you react if the neighbors confessed? The Miller children are still alive, and still appear at night. July 1973. Clayton, Illinois, a small town where time seemed frozen. Narrow streets were packed with aging Chevrolets and Fords, store windows displayed faded mannequins, and from Daisy's diner speakers drifted the gravelly voice of Jim Croce. Summer carried the smell of gasoline, hot asphalt, and freshly cut grass. But inside the county archive, a stone building from the 1910s, the world shifted. Air stood still, heavy with dust. Oak doors creaked, and in the dim hallway appeared a young man with a leather satchel. Michael Thorne, 28, reporter for the Midwest Chronicle. Michael was stubborn by nature. Colleagues joked he could rot in an archive for a week just to find a single paragraph. His father, a Korean War veteran, used to say, "Truth is a weapon, Mike. People fear it more than bullets." That mantra drove him now, sifting through files no one else wanted to touch. In early July, a rare permission slip landed in his hands, access to newly declassified government files. No explanation, just a stamped note handed by a secretary. 2 hours. Whatever you find, that's all. The basement swallowed him. The air smelled of mold and rust. Endless shelves of boxes lined the walls. Labels screamed, "Confidential," "Restricted," "Case study." They looked less like records than tombstones. He set a lamp buzzing to life. On the desk, a microfilm reader rattled as reels clicked through. Names flickered past: Brown case, Anderson study, Harris family. Then one folder stopped him cold. Heavy, thicker than the rest. Across the cover, in jagged pencil, "Miller family case. Restricted." Michael's pulse quickened. The name was familiar. In Clayton, whispers had long painted the Millers as outsiders. They ran a farm at the edge of town. Their children rarely appeared at school. Neighbors muttered about noises in the barn after midnight. By the late 60s, the farm was abandoned, but some swore the windows still glowed with light. He opened the folder. The first page. A 1936 memorandum, dry as bone. Subject stable. Proceeding to next stage. The words felt colder than any headline he had ever read. Beneath it lay photographs. One image. A boy, maybe 10 years old, staring straight into the lens. His eyes were unervingly pale, almost translucent, reflecting the flash in a way that looked unnatural. On the back, 1951, with a notation, "Test subject number 7. Michael's throat tightened. The basement walls seemed to press closer, silence thickening. He kept turning pages. His fingers brushed a sealed envelope, stamped with cracked red wax. The seal bore a strange symbol like a slashed circle. And then he heard it. A faint breath, as if someone inhaled between the shelves. He spun, nothing. Cliffhanger. Above his desk sat a second box. Across it, in bold red marker, "Do not open, Miller." Continued. Michael spread the Miller file across the table like a map of a country that never wanted visitors. The earliest documents smelled of starch and coal dust. County ledgers, crop reports, church bulletins from a one-street town in eastern Indiana where fields ran up to the porches and the sky was always bigger than the houses. The Millers looked ordinary on paper. Census 1930, Ephraim, 34, Ruth, 30, Sarah 9, John, 7, Miriam, 4. Farm tenancy. Corn, soy, a few head of cattle. A note from the pastor of First Baptist listed a baptism and a funeral in the same week, and under it in careful penmanship, Ruth's nerves troubled again. The pastor added a line that made Michael sit up. "Children sing in thirds at night. Know him I know." Neighbors' letters, copied into a county folder, painted a flatter picture. The Millers kept to themselves. The children didn't run barefoot with the others. Ruth hung quilts across windows even in June. But then came a school nurse's report from April 1933. Pupils John M. and Sarah M. respond to simultaneous stimulus with identical pupil dilation plus or minus 0.2s. Siblings appear to maintain synchronized gaze during silent intervals. A margin note, not the nurse's hand, read, "Forward to Chicago." Within months the file acquired new voices. Typed, crisp, bureaucratic. Northwestern University Medical School letterhead. Cook County Hospital routing slips. The phrase Federal Health Program appeared and then multiplied like a stamp. A Dr. H.R. Colling sent his first field note after a visit to the farm. Home clean, family polite. Children unusually calm. When questioned separately, both older children repeat the same story in the same sequence of words, including an invented mistake. I have not observed such mirroring. The Great Plains were cracking with drought and breadlines in the cities grew longer, yet money flowed toward the millers. Vouchers for travel assistance, lists of nutritional supplements, and, most chilling, authorizations for overnight observation. In a 1934 memo someone had typed non-invasive and then struck it through with a pencil so hard the paper furrowed. Michael turned to the photographs. Not the boy from 1951, earlier, grainier prints. Ephraim in a hat too big for his head, a mule, a barn with its paint flayed by wind. In the doorway 3 children stood in a row. He recognized John by the ears. What held the eye, though, was their stillness. Even in a long exposure farm children blur, these 3 did not. Their faces carried the mild expression of people listening to a sound too far away to name. By 1935, the tone of the paperwork changed. The word subjects replaced family. Visits became schedules, protocols. A typed sheet labeled harmonic response. Field admin outlined a test Michael reread twice. Play tone generator A in barn. Observe respiration of subjects through window. Repeat with tone generator B in root cellar. Record latency between inhalations. At the bottom, in pencil, they breathe together. There were moral objections, small ones at first. A county welfare worker wrote, Mrs. M. appears exhausted. Children return from town pale, want to sleep during daylight. Recommend pause. The reply from Chicago was 2 lines long. Thank you for your diligence. Continuation is in the national interest. A single letter from Ephraim survived. Unsent. Folded into a lab report as if by accident. Sir, we do not understand what you hope to find. My children are not sick. They work and learn. When you take them, they return changed. They do not cry. I think that is not right. Someone underlined the last sentence and wrote, Baseline temperament improvement noted. In late winter 1936, an unfamiliar stamp appeared. U.S. Public Health Service Special Clearance. A courier receipt logged that the Millers were transported overnight to a regional facility in Iowa for short-term evaluation. The page after that was a carbon copy with half the letters ghosted. But the words still landed. Subject stable. Proceeding to next stage. Michael checked the county newspaper for that week. There, between a seed sale and a preacher's revival, a 1-inch item, local family visit specialists in Chicago. Nothing else. No follow-up. No return notice. He closed his eyes and tried to hear the world of 1936. The rattle of Model of Fords, the radio hiss, the creak of wind pumps over dry wells. Somewhere in that soundscape a family was being renamed subjects, and the town was learning to call it help. At the back of the section a thin strip of microfilm had been spliced on. The header was blacked out, but 2 lines remained legible. Parental consent reaffirmed. Beneath it, in a different hand, ink pressed hard into the paper. Consent obtained by other means. Cliffhanger. The final image from 1936 was not a photograph but a floor plan. Rectangles labeled Ward A, Ward B, and a smaller room with a single word in block capitals. Choir. The plan labeled choir had burned into Michael's mind. It was not a word you expected in medical architecture, not beside Ward A and Ward B. It carried with it the odor of ritual, of arrangement, of something meant to echo beyond walls. He rolled the microfilm forward, and what spilled out was a chapter of American history no county fair ever mentioned. The Miller family disappeared from Indiana records in mid-1937. School rosters carried their names one spring and erased them by autumn. A librarian in Fort Wayne scribbled, "Transferred," on a card and nothing more. But the federal file grew thicker. Now it bore a watermark: Office of Scientific Inquiry, Midwest Regional Facility. Michael knew this was a wartime branch, founded quietly before Pearl Harbor but already circling ideas of control, sound, and crowd behavior. The choir room was not a metaphor. It was a basement chamber beneath the facility in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. The documents described it with architectural coldness. 12 by 8 meters, walls of plastered brick, acoustic insulation applied, lantern sconces replaced with electric fixtures. In photographs, benches lined the walls like a chapel stripped of its faith. Reports logged the children's placement there. John and Sarah, the older siblings, were seated across from each other, Miriam between them, and 2 younger children, born in 1932 and 1934, added to the arrangement. A typed line read, "Subjects form pentagonal orientation." Michael sketched it on the margin. A star of children in wooden chairs. Tests began with sound. Low-frequency hums played through transducers in the floor. Observers noted that after 3 minutes, respiration synchronized. After 7, the children began to hum faintly. Not words, not tunes, but sustained tones that met each other in uncanny harmony. One physician described it like organ pipes finding common resonance. By 1938, the notes sharpened into something else. On August 12, an observer wrote, "Subjects produced sustained 3-part harmony without directive. Duration, 47 minutes. Observers reported mild headache, metallic taste, and visual distortion." Another line, underlined twice, "Window panes on north side rattled." Michael paused. Outside the laboratory, the Midwest was dusting itself off from depression, recovering with Roosevelt's programs, planting corn again, buying radios and Chevrolets. But beneath Iowa soil, children were being tuned like instruments. One photograph stopped him. It showed Ruth Miller, mother, sitting in the corner of the choir room, her eyes cast down, her hands clasped. The caption, "Maternal presence employed as stabilizing agent." She looked both present and erased, like a shadow forced to attend. The report that followed read, "Mother observed crying during test. Emotional state considered secondary. Focus remains on subject's coherence." By 1939, words like coherence, resonance, and entrainment filled the pages. War loomed in Europe, but in Iowa the war had already begun on the Miller children. Michael traced the dates. September 1st, 1939, Hitler invades Poland. Same week, the Millers were recorded in Test 46B. Subjects sustained harmonic chord for 73 minutes. Observers experienced disorientation. One subject, John, collapsed post-session. Pulse irregular, but resumed normal within 10 minutes. There were memos debating applications. Some saw the children as a study in neurology, others as a key to acoustic warfare. A colonel from Washington scribbled, "Potential for mass crowd influence? Investigate thresholds." Beneath, in smaller hand, ethical implications noted but not obstructive. Letters from locals surfaced, neighbors who lived near the facility. One wrote to the Gazette, "Some nights a hum carries on the wind, not machinery, not church singing. My windows shake though the air is still." The letter was never printed. Only a carbon copy survived. In 1940, Ephraim Miller's name reappeared. He had been absent since that unsent letter. A file marked incident report described him trying to remove his children from the facility. Guards restrained him. He shouted that they were not singing of their own will, that they echoed what the walls told them. The report ends abruptly. Father relocated. Subject uncooperative. No further trace of him appeared. The children remained, and the choir room acquired a new feature, a recording device, reel-to-reel. The transcript of one session survived. The hum begins, then 5 voices rise. The words, if they were words, were phonetic fragments, sol, endor el. The transcriber noted, "Language unidentified, Not Latin, not German. Phonemes repeat with structure. Possible glossolalia. But what unsettled Michael most was the line beneath. Playback not recommended. Personnel exposed to recording report nausea, nightmares, recurring auditory phenomena. The last document in this section dated October 1941. It bore the seal of the Office of Scientific Inquiry, stamped urgent. It ordered the transfer of select subjects to a facility near Chicago for further integration with Project Choir. Only Sarah and John were named. The others were listed as pending. Michael leaned back in his chair. Outside his own window, modern Chicago buzzed with sirens and traffic. But in those files, 1941 breathed again. Fields of corn under frost, small towns still blind, a mother silenced, children singing in a room that had no choir loft, only walls meant to hold resonance. The file ended with one final sketch. A waveform traced by hand, jagged peaks, and beneath it a note. Unclassified anomaly. Resonance exceeds equipment tolerance. Observe for architectural effects. Cliffhanger. Michael realized the experiments had escalated from observation to weaponization. The next reel of microfilm was labeled in block letters, Phase 2, War Application. Would the Miller children's voices be carried into the chaos of a world already on fire? The next reel unspooled with a hiss, and Michael steadied his hands. The label, Phase 2, War Application, already felt like a death sentence. The files began in January 1942, only a month after Pearl Harbor. The United States had thrown itself into war, and so had the Miller family, though not by choice. A memo stamped War Department Psychological Operations Division stated plainly, subjects choir are to be evaluated for field potential. Limitations of laboratory study must yield to practical demonstration. Coordination with Chicago unit authorized. Sarah and John Miller were now teenagers, their profiles attached to military documents as if they were recruits. Their photographs, stark, grainy headshots, carried only numbers. Their names had been replaced with identifiers, S1 and S2. The first field demonstration took place not in Europe, but in Illinois. An abandoned brick warehouse outside Joliet was requisitioned. Witnesses described the space. High rafters, broken windows, soot-stained walls. Sarah and John were seated at opposite ends of the hall, their chairs bolted to the floor. Lanterns hung from iron hooks. The report recorded what followed. At 1947, Subject S1 initiated low-frequency hum. Subject S2 harmonized within 12 seconds. Duration 11 minutes. 6 observers reported dizziness. 2 fainted. Structural resonance noted. Hairline cracks observed in northwest wall. The language was dry, but between the lines Michael saw horror. Teenagers forced to hum in cavernous warehouses, their voices weaponized into tremors that could shake stone. By mid-1942, the Millers were transferred again, this time to an Army facility outside Milwaukee. There, alongside chemical and psychological research, they became a project marked Resonant Choir. The phrase returned like a ghost. Reports linked their sessions to attempts at crowd influence. A controlled experiment involved 30 recruits seated in formation. At 2000 hours, Sarah and John began their sustained tones. After 6 minutes, several recruits rose in unison, uncommanded, as if pulled by invisible strings. The official note: induced synchronous behavior achieved. Application promising. Michael shivered. This wasn't just science, it was possession in uniform. The files contained letters of protest, too. One psychiatrist, Dr. Miriam Halperin, wrote in 1943, "These subjects are children, not instruments. Their harmonic response may not be conscious but compelled. Continued use risks psychological collapse." Her memo was crossed out in red pencil. Objection dismissed. Proceed. And so it proceeded. In 1944, a darker layer appeared. A cable marked confidential. Overseas detailed a demonstration in a secure London bunker. Allied officers listened as the Millers performed. A British colonel described it. A sound not merely heard but felt, vibrating in marrow. One imagines it could unnerve entire battalions. Sarah's health declined. A report noted fainting spells, nosebleeds, and episodes of absent expression. Yet the experiments only intensified. John, taller, stronger, became the focus. An officer wrote, "Subject S2 demonstrates superior endurance. Recommend singular deployment." Sarah was relegated to supportive role. By late 1945, as Germany collapsed and the war neared its end, the files turned frantic. Notes mentioned Operation Echo, a proposal to deploy John against POWs to test mass compliance. There were arguments in the margins. Unreliable, dangerous if uncontrolled. Others countered, too valuable to shelve. But then silence. No further reports on John or Sarah appeared. The last page was a transfer order, and signed, dated September 1945. Subjects to be moved to undisclosed location under civilian oversight. Project Choir to be archived. Michael leaned back, heart hammering. The war had swallowed so many secrets, but this one was buried not overseas, not in battlefields, but here, in warehouses, basements, and Midwestern labs. 2 children's voices had been forged into a weapon and then erased from history. Yet a handwritten note lingered at the bottom of the reel's final page, almost like a warning. Choir dispersed but not dissolved. Listen carefully, echoes remain where walls remember. The 5th reel clicked into place, its canister dented as if someone had tried to crush it shut. Michael steadied himself, knowing the war had only been a chapter, not an ending. The stamped label read, "Post-war integration, civilian sector." The footage opened not with battlefields or bunkers but with suburban streets. Rows of tidy houses in the Midwest, identical porches, clipped hedges, freshly paved driveways. It was the American dream taking root, but the files whispered of something darker beneath the white picket fences. A typed memorandum from 1946, Office of Naval Research, explained the shift. With the cessation of hostilities, certain anomalous assets require containment under non-military auspices. Civilian life offers both cover and continuity of observation. Project Choir subjects have been assigned identities and relocated. Michael's breath caught. Sarah and John Miller had not been released. They had been replanted like dangerous seeds into ordinary soil. The reel flickered to images of government-owned housing outside Dayton, Ohio. The caption, Site, Oakwood District, Integration Phase. A blurry photo showed a woman with tired eyes, Sarah, now in her 20s, pushing a stroller. Next to her, John walked stiffly, a hat pulled low. Their expressions were hollow, as though the war had drained more than years. Reports described adjusted behavior protocols. Once a week, plainclothes agents sat in on their dinner table, recording every detail. The notes were chilling. Subject S1 demonstrates limited autonomy. Smiles at neighbors, but tone of voice carries residual harmonic undertone. Subject S2 increasingly solitary. Tends to basement activities at night. Residents report vibrations through floorboards. Neighbors remembered oddities. One elderly woman's statement was tucked into the file. They were polite enough, but sometimes, in the evenings, you'd hear a low hum, like a tuning fork, coming through the walls. The lights would flicker, too. My husband thought it was the wiring. I never believed that. By 1950, the Miller integration evolved into something more sinister. Local experiments masked as civic life. John took a job at a manufacturing plant, but reports noted strange incidents during shifts. Coworkers complained of headaches. Machines vibrated violently when he stood too close. A memo stamped top secret concluded, Subject S2 continues to exhibit resonant influence on mechanical systems. Industrial setting may provide cover for sustained study. Sarah's decline deepened. Doctors noted sudden lapses, catatonic spells in grocery aisles, whispers escaping her lips without sound. Yet church records in Dayton described her as a devoted choir member. Michael froze at the phrasing, the echo of choir in civilian disguise. The files became stranger. Microfilm clippings described disappearances. 3 local children in 1953, last seen walking near the Millers' home. Police reports listed them as runaways, but a handwritten note in the margins asked, "Did choir expand recruitment?" More memos surfaced. Family anomalies continue. Recommend monitoring next generation. Early signs of transmission must be identified. Photographs followed, blurred, off-center snapshots of children on bicycles. Their eyes catching the flash too brightly, faces half erased in light streaks. The final entry of the reel stopped Michael cold. A single page, undated, typed with urgency. Archive notice. Choir no longer confined to controlled environments. Subject lineage dispersing through community. Recommend immediate classification upgrade. Records to be sealed. Public access denied. At the bottom, scrawled by hand in faded ink, "The Millers are not finished. They are multiplying." Michael's skin crawled. The war had forged them, but the suburbs had hidden them. By the 1950s, the Miller anomaly was no longer a government experiment confined to warehouses and bunkers. It was loose, living among ordinary families, concealed by lawn mowers and Sunday services. And as the reel snapped to its end, Michael realized the next canister, thicker than the rest, stamped, generational effects, 1960s, would not describe just Sarah and John. It would show what their children had become. The 6th reel was heavier than the rest. The canister was dented along the rim, sealed with a strip of government tape that had yellowed to the color of nicotine. On its label, typed in uneven ink, stood only 2 words, generational effects. Michael's fingers trembled as he unspooled the brittle film. The whir of the projector filled the room, and shadows leapt across the archive walls. At first, the reel showed ordinary suburban scenes. Neighborhood barbecues, children running through sprinklers, teenagers dancing in school gyms under paper lanterns. But each frame had the same underlying subject, the Miller children. Sarah and John, by then in their 30s, had raised 3, Thomas, born 1951, Ruth, born 1954, and Daniel, born 1957. Their family photographs looked deceptively normal at first glance. Matching Sunday clothes, posed smiles, tidy haircuts. But the documents spliced into the reel told another story. A 1958 medical report typed in cold clinical language. Thomas, age 7, cardiovascular rhythm irregular, displays secondary pulse undetectable by stethoscope but visible through oscillographic equipment. Episodes accompanied by harmonic tones. Source undetermined. Next page. Ruth, age 4. Ocular reflections suggest abnormal retinal layering. In low light, subjects claim her eyes produce luminescence. No consistent measurement possible. Effects transient. And finally, Daniel, age 1. Preliminary tests inconclusive. Family relocated to extended suburban housing project in Illinois to permit observation under new monitoring initiative. The reel flickered into grainy black and white surveillance footage of the Illinois house. Agents had wired the home with concealed microphones and cameras hidden in air vents. One sequence showed Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, her face gaunt, humming softly while Ruth stared into the lens, unblinking, as though she knew it was there. The audio hissed with feedback before cutting out. Neighbors noticed too. A local schoolteacher's report was preserved on microfilm. The Miller boy, Thomas, does not blink in rhythm with other children. During music class, the piano keys vibrated though untouched when he hummed. Children grew frightened. I recommend evaluation. The government response wasn't medical care, it was containment. In 1961, Project Choir, thought to be dissolved after the war, was revived under a new branch, Choir Domestic. A declassified memo revealed, unlike parents, children display amplification of anomalous traits. Recommend sustained environmental immersion. Testing should occur in settings indistinguishable from ordinary civilian life. That phrase burned in Michael's mind. Indistinguishable from ordinary life. The reel grew darker. One clip shot in daylight showed Ruth on a swing. As she pumped her legs, The chain links rattled violently, as though caught in a storm. Dust and leaves swirled in circles around her, yet the day was calm. Behind the camera, the agent whispered, "Wind's not natural." Another sequence, midnight 1963, grainy film, a basement shot. John stood behind Daniel, now 6 years old, who pressed his small hand against the granite slab taken from an earlier site. The rune, the odal, cracked further beneath his touch. A burst of orange light filled the room. The film jumped and warped, leaving only static. Typed notes filled the gaps. Subject D3 demonstrates direct resonance with odal artifact. Unclear whether parental guidance is complicit or coerced. Recommend continuation of familial structure to test transgenerational propagation. Michael leaned forward. His heart pounded as he realized what these files implied. The Millers weren't just anomalies, they were breeding experiments. The reel shifted again, this time to 1965. Community reports. Clipping from the Chicago Tribune. Local residents petition zoning board after series of blackouts, centered on Oakwood District. Handwritten note on the margin. Grid failure coincides with subject R, 2 episodes. Cover story successful. Another clipping, from a church bulletin. The Miller girl sings beautifully, though some parishioners complain of headaches during hymns. And then, a chilling police record. 3 teenagers missing after a summer bonfire near the Miller residence. Case closed without charges. In the corner of the file, an anonymous scrawl in pencil. Choir children present. By the late 60s, the reel showed the children as adolescents. In one photo, Thomas leaned against a car, but the chrome bumper reflected a warped double image of him. One smiling, one grimacing. Ruth's school portrait had been tampered with, her pupils scraped away, replaced with black ink. Daniel, in a blurry football team photo, appeared twice, once in uniform, once shadowed, standing behind himself. The last sequence in the reel froze Michael's blood. An abandoned high school gymnasium. Rows of folding chairs, a reel-to-reel recorder set up on the stage. The Miller children stood before it, silent. An agent's voice crackled from the tape. Begin harmonic test. Phase 3. First, nothing. Then a low hum. The gym lights flickered. Metal rafters groaned. And dust cascaded from the ceiling. The children never moved their lips. The sound rose until the camera vibrated, the lens cracking before the reel cut to black. The final frame lingered. A single card typed in blunt capital letters. Containment failed. Public access terminated. Archive sealed. Michael shut off the projector. Silence pressed around him, heavier than the dust. The truth was clear. By the 1960s, the Millers weren't hidden anymore. They were shaping their environment, bending reality in ways the government could no longer deny. And yet, if the documents had been sealed, if no official record remained, where had the Millers gone next? At the bottom of the canister, a loose slip of paper fluttered out, handwritten in a hurried scrawl, almost illegible. The children are alive. They are waiting. The 70s did not begin with thunder. They began with a hum, softer than memory, quieter than a secret, threading through places where America gathered to convince itself everything was fine. On paper, the Millers vanished after '69. The gym test, the cracked lens, the typewritten containment failed, and then nothing. But absence is a kind of map. It leaves outlines where bodies used to be. Field notes reappeared under new letterheads. Department of Transportation memos about localized substation oscillations. Federal Communications Commission complaints about harmonic interference around school radio clubs. A private contractor's report from a stadium in Ohio, 1970. Structural beam vibration during soundcheck. No audible cause. Stagehands nauseated. 2 fainted. Scribbled in the margin, almost as a joke. Choir kids in the crowd. The hum began turning up in music. Touring engineers swapped stories in bars off the interstate. Inexplicable feedback that followed 3 teenagers from show to show. A low tone that emptied stomachs and sent bartenders outside to breathe. In Memphis, a session guitarist stormed out of a take because his strings turned to lead beneath his fingers. Recorders later showed a smear of subsonic sludge no one could mix out. The label called it tape damage. The producer whispered, "It's them." Churches felt it too. In a Midwestern megachurch that rehearsed under fluorescent lights and hope, parishioners reported holy chills during an ordinary hymn. The balcony fixtures rattled in their housings, and the pastor's mic produced a note no organ could claim. One usher said the youth group had visitors that week. Quiet, well-dressed, eyes too pale in the photo. And then politics. A campaign manager in 72 logged an anomaly. At rally, crowd fell silent in unison precisely at 19 hours 3 minutes and 17 seconds, stood without prompting, remained standing for 47 seconds. No cue from stage. Sound meters show sub-60 Hz activity. The note was filed under acoustics issue, and the manager learned not to say the word possession in front of donors. The government didn't sleep. Choir Domestic simply changed its name again, this time to something so bland it disappeared in the budget. Community health audits. Grants to study school ventilation, to upgrade auditorium wiring, to survey church acoustics. Each grant placed a technician with a reel-to-reel and a clipboard exactly where the hum was strongest. Each technician filed reports upward into a throat that swallowed them. Meanwhile, the Millers had children in every direction, not by name but by resonance. Friends who lived on their street, kids who shared lunch tables, neighbors who married in haste and moved 2 counties over. The point of a choir is not a soloist. It is voices multiplying until walls forget where the first note began. A cassette surfaced in 1971 inside a padded envelope labeled for training use only. The label swore it was machine noise for equipment calibration. Michael played it years later in a hotel room, hand over the radio speaker, volume low. The tape began with room tone, then a faint rush, as if a distant highway had taken a breath. He felt it in his ribs before he heard it. One pure frequency blooming into 3. The lamp flickered. He shut it off, heart racing. On the cassette's J card, a technician had written, "Do not play alone." Reports from schools in Indiana and Illinois multiplied. Synchronized staring during fire drills. A shop teacher's steel lathe rattling when no one touched it. A choir director quitting mid-rehearsal, saying the altos were following something that isn't me. A guidance counselor filed a warning about 3 students who never blinked out of step with each other. The district called it adolescent behavior clustering, a phrase so clean it squeaked. The press tried briefly. A stringer in Ohio submitted a piece to a city paper about the sound that makes people stand. An editor killed it in proofs. A late-night radio host in Iowa invited callers to discuss that humming no one else hears. The station switched to canned weather at minute 7 and never brought him back. Sarah's name resurfaced once, in a hospital billing ledger under an alias that cracked at the edge. Unilateral hearing loss, unexplained. The physician's note, patient reports silence that roars. John's trace was a building permit for a basement renovation. No inspection sticker was ever posted. Somewhere between those lines, Michael Thorne bought a new spiral notebook and began to list coincidences. He drew arrows between stadiums and churches, blackouts and school concerts, campaign rallies and county fairs. He wrote the word choir at the top of a page and underlined it until the paper thinned. He didn't yet have the box from the archive. He didn't yet know the Miller file would confirm what the country was already humming. But others knew. One memo, torn on the right edge, found its way into a box of unrelated highway records. In a different hand from the official stamp, someone had written, "Stop looking for the family. Start listening for the rooms." The memo listed places: a skating rink in Gary that closed after the mirror wall shivered, a VFW hall in Springfield where light fixtures sang, a roller coaster in Ohio that shut down for maintenance after a night of inexplicable echoes. The list ended with an address: Clayton, Illinois County Archive, basement level. Next to it, a date circled twice: July 1973. That was the day Mrs. Grace would hand Michael a key and say, 2 hours. Whatever you find, that's all. He didn't know, not yet, that the hum had been waiting for him, that the files were bait and warning both, that the rooms remembered, that the choir did not require mouths to sing. Cliffhanger. On the back of the memo, in pencil pressed so hard it embossed the paper, a final line. When they stop your ears, they don't want to keep you from hearing. They want the room to do the listening. The basement of the Clayton County Archive smelled of wet stone and resignation. Michael followed Mrs. Grace down iron stairs that moaned with each step. Her keys jingled softly, an accompaniment to the fluorescent hum above them. She paused at the final door. A steel slab painted the color of fading chalk. "You get 2 hours," she said, voice flat, eyes unwilling to meet his. "I'll lock it after. Don't make me regret this." Inside, the room breathed like a lung. Rows of metal shelves sagged with forgotten files, cardboard boxes, reels of tape. Dust drifted in golden shafts from a vent. Michael's pulse quickened. This was no myth, no half-remembered anecdote from a janitor. The government had left fingerprints here. He opened the first box. A label read, "Miller, Subject A." Inside lay folders stamped confidential, pages thick with typewriter scars. Photographs paper-clipped to reports. John Miller in his youth, wires taped to his temples. Sarah in a soundproof booth, eyes closed, her lips moving though no sound was recorded. A doctor's note. Vocal cords vibrate without phonation. Resonance originates in cranial cavities. Recommend prolonged exposure tests. Another folder. Subject C, failure. A photograph of a boy, perhaps 6, his face blurred by the camera's movement. Below, a line of text. Could not retain harmonic stability. Subject expired within 72 hours. Someone had underlined expired in red pencil. Michael's hands trembled as he slid a reel-to-reel tape from its sleeve. The label, field recording, Gymnasium, Indiana, 1965. He threaded it onto the old machine in the corner, plugged it into the wall. Static filled the air, then a low tone, subtle at first, then pressing like invisible hands against his ribs. His chest tightened. Light fixtures above swayed, though no wind stirred. The tape squealed as if resisting playback. Then a chorus of children's voices rose. Not singing, but holding a single endless note. The hum. Michael shut it off, sweating. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound itself. He rewound, pressed play again, but this time there was more. A man's voice intruded. Test Series 9. Duration 30 seconds. Note synchronization successful. Subject B collapsed at 17 seconds. Proceeding regardless. Then the children's note returned, splintering into harmonics that shook the machine. He yanked the plug from the socket. Shoving the tape back, Michael opened another box. Project Choir, 1971. The reports grew colder, more detached. Charts of frequencies, diagrams of resonance chambers. Objective. Induce collective obedience response in controlled environment. A note scrawled in the margin. School assembly proves effective. His stomach lurched. These were not accidents. The Miller children were templates. At the bottom of one folder, tucked behind medical forms, he found a photograph unlike the others. Black and white, grainy, stamped July 1972. A group of children in a church basement, holding hymnals. In the center, a boy with pale eyes staring directly at the camera. No flash glare, no accident. His stare seemed deliberate, almost knowing. On the back, someone had written, "He listens for the room." Michael's throat tightened. He slid the photo into his notebook, careful not to make noise, as if the faces might hear him. Then he found a sealed envelope, wax cracked but still sticky. Inside, a single sheet, typed unevenly as though the machine had been dropped. When the rooms hum, do not run. Running makes them follow. Stillness is survival. The Millers were not the first. They will not be the last. His watch ticked loudly. 90 minutes gone. He packed his notes, slid the tape back into its box, but kept the photograph. As he rose, the air shifted. The hum began. It wasn't the tape machine this time. It seeped from the stone walls, low and patient, vibrating his bones. Dust cascaded from the ceiling in fine curtains. One of the archive shelves rattled. Then another. Michael's teeth hurt. The key scraped in the lock. Mrs. Grace stood at the door, face pale. You heard it too, didn't you? She whispered. Michael swallowed hard. What happens if it doesn't stop? She didn't answer. She only closed the door behind him, her hand trembling on the knob. Cliffhanger. As Michael stepped into the July sunlight, the photograph in his pocket grew warm, as if the boy's pale eyes were still watching. The newsroom of the Indianapolis Herald should have been a sanctuary. Typewriters clattered, telephones rang, coffee burned on hot plates. A normal hum of deadlines and deadlines missed. But Michael sat at his desk with a folder that should not have existed outside the Clayton County Archive. The photograph of the boy stared up at him, pale eyes unwavering. He had placed it face down 3 times, but somehow it always slid out from under the papers. A trick of the air conditioning, he told himself. Yet each time the eyes seemed sharper. He had already written 3 drafts of his article. Each was a graveyard of sentences, unfinished, slashed through with ink. Government Experiments on Midwestern Family was not a headline an editor would print without proof. But the evidence was vanishing in his hands. The tape? When he tried to play it again, the sound was gone, erased, replaced by static. The medical reports? Half the typewritten lines had faded to blank stretches, as if bleached by unseen hands. And the most damning document, the one about school assemblies, had disappeared entirely. Michael stormed to the records room, demanding the original envelope back. But the clerk, a tired man with ink-stained fingers, shook his head. No file by that name. Never has been. Back at his desk, Michael opened his notebook. The photograph of the boy slid loose again. This time words had appeared on its back in faint pencil. Do not print. His hands went cold. He hadn't written that. He called Mrs. Grace, his only ally in Clayton County. She picked up on the second ring, voice hushed. They came, she whispered. 2 men in gray suits. They asked what you'd seen. I told them nothing, but, Michael, the shelves are empty. Every box. Gone. The line went dead. That night, Michael dreamed of the children. They stood in a circle, hymnals open, their note rising until the dream itself shook apart. He woke with blood on his pillow. His nose had bled in his sleep. The next morning, the Herald ran a different story in his space. County Fair opens with record attendance. His editor shrugged. Your piece wasn't ready, so we filled the gap. But Michael had seen the galley proof the night before. His article had been there. Someone had replaced it overnight. He returned to his apartment to find his desk drawer ajar. Inside, his own typewriter ribbon had been removed. When he fed a new one, the first page that rolled through was already marked. 3 words hammered in uneven type. We are listening. Michael froze. Through his window, the August streets of Indianapolis shimmered with summer heat, children laughing, cars backfiring. Normal life. But beneath it, almost masked by the cicadas, he thought he heard the low vibration again. The hum, softer this time, but alive. He reached for the photograph, intending to burn it. But as he struck a match, the flame faltered. The boy's pale eyes seemed brighter than the fire. And the penciled warning had changed. If you burn it, they come faster. Cliffhanger. Michael blew out the match, his hands shaking. Outside, a delivery truck rattled by, its radio tuned to static. Only it wasn't static. It was the children's note, bleeding through the airwaves. The newsroom was no longer safe, the apartment no longer his. Michael packed his satchel and left Indianapolis on a rain-slicked night, the photograph still tucked inside, its edges soft from being handled too many times. He told himself he would drive until the hum faded, until he reached silence. But the hum followed. It vibrated through telephone poles as he sped along Highway 36. It throbbed beneath the tires like a second heartbeat. Every radio station dissolved into the same drone, a low note rising. He reached Clayton County before dawn. The farmhouse stood as it always had, abandoned, windows blank as eyes. Yet a faint light pulsed inside, not steady, but rhythmic, like breath. He stepped through the threshold, the wood groaning under his weight, the air thick with mold and dust. On the kitchen table lay new documents. His name was on the cover sheet, typewritten, Subject: Miller investigation. Pending termination. The date: September 9th, 1973. Tomorrow. A sound drifted from the back room. Children's laughter, soft and thin, like a recording played too slowly. He followed it each step heavier until he opened the door. They were there. For children pale as milk, standing in a circle. Their hymnals were gone. In their hands they held nothing. And yet the note filled the room, vibrating in his bones. They turned to him as one, eyes wide, reflecting no light, only emptiness. The smallest child spoke. "We've been waiting." Michael tried to ask who they were, what they wanted, but his throat closed around the words. The boy from the photograph stepped forward. In his palm lay the match Michael had struck in his apartment days ago, still unburned. "We keep what you destroy," the boy whispered, "and we are never gone." The hum rose, the walls shaking, plaster raining down. Michael clutched his satchel, but the papers inside burst into ash without flame. His typewritten notes curled into nothingness. Only the photograph survived, slipping from his grasp and landing at the children's feet. The girl bent to pick it up. "Now you belong here too." The light swelled orange, white, blinding. When Michael opened his eyes, the farmhouse was empty. No children, no documents. Only his satchel on the floor, perfectly clean, as if untouched. Inside, one sheet of paper remained. 3 words. Some files endless. Outside, the fields were quiet, crickets singing, stars steady. Normal. He walked to his car, forcing himself to breathe. But when he slid into the driver's seat, the rearview mirror showed not his own reflection. Only 4 pale children sitting in the back, their mouths closed, their eyes fixed on him. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, but the radio played no music, no news, only the children's note. Rising, stretching, filling the night. And then, just before the hum devoured everything, Michael thought he heard words inside it, clear at last. "We were never experiments. We were the future." Sparkle's final note to viewer. Some secrets should stay buried. Some archives were sealed for a reason. But what if the files are still being written? And what if the children are not in the past, but already in your neighborhood?